Well, I was going to do a cold start video for you guys, but it got a little bit more interesting. I turned the gas on and gas just started pouring out of my S&S Super E carburetor. It hasn't been cleaned in some time. That's pretty common on old bikes with carburetors, especially if you're not running a fuel filter, which I'm not. I should be, but I'm not. So, it happens. So I'm going to pull the carburetor and clean the float needle. It's usually trash in the float needle and seat. If it just starts out of the blue like that, chances are it's trash in the seat and not a bad needle. It could be a bad needle. I mean, they've got to give up sometime. So I'm going to pull it off and check it out. See, I've got this safety wired here, so I'm going to have to remove my safety wire to get my backing plate bolts off. Okay, so this is pretty simple. Let's get some flathead screws on the bottom of the bowl here. Pop those open and get access to the float bowl. This float bowl fills up with gas, and then it uses that fuel to meter and run into the engine. To keep the bowl from overfilling, it's like a stop valve in there. It's called your float, and that float gets the tiniest piece of dirt, any kind of particle, anything foreign in it, it'll prevent it from closing that valve, and it'll just overflow the bowl. So by design, to prevent it from filling up your engine with gasoline, it has an overflow on the carburetor right here, and the gas will just come right out of there. Usually you'll have a hose hooked to this and run somewhere else. You'll see the gas running out from a mysterious location, but that's where it's coming from. If I can get this old float bowl off, I think there might be one screw in the accelerator pump that runs all the way through. You don't have to take all three of these out on the S&S, but I forgot there is one long one that goes all the way through here. So there we go. Alright, and there we are. This is the float, this big ring that you see here. And this is the float needle. This little thing, you have a float needle and a float seat. So let's pop that out. And you can see the it'll come out as an assembly here, and I can see a little trash in the bottom of my float bowl there, so that's a sign that I've been getting some crud in my carburetor for sure. Don't lose this pin. Make note of how your float needle attaches to the float right here. It just hooks on there and dangles like this. This float needle is a rubber tip type. You want to look for any grooves in that rubber needle where it's been wearing, and mine has very little. It looks to be in pretty good shape. It feels pretty soft. You want to feel for that. If it's too hard, it won't seat. This is the seat in here, this brass deal, and you could actually take the whole seat out by removing that, but I don't think it's necessary. I'm just going to clean this bowl out. I'm going to blow it out with a little compressed air and put it right back together. I'm going to use my Kim dip. Got a gallon jug of carburetor cleaner here. Just going to give this a little soak in this for a few minutes. Get all the crud out. It's got a little basket in there. I don't want to leave it in here too long because this still has my accelerator pump diaphragm in there and I don't want to damage it. I'm just going to give it a little rinse. I would normally just throw the whole carburetor in here and soak it with the critical parts out, but this will be fine for the sake of doing it quickly. Just a little something here. It worked great to loosen up the grime that was in there. It didn't need much because it was running really good. It just cranked it up yesterday and it didn't leak, so this is just a bit of debris that got underneath the float seat. I've got a new 2-gallon peanut tank on the bike that I ordered. It was a raw steel tank, and you know, ideally you would have a tank like that lined because the inside of the tank can rust a little bit if the gas level's low. But I don't like using a tank liner if I don't have to, because the tank liner will eventually come loose and then it'll get in everything. You'll experience all sorts of problems. So I would rather just deal with a little bit of rust coming out of the tank than a bunch of tank liner coming loose and getting everywhere. And once you get that tank liner in the tank, you can't get it all out. It'll make a huge mess. That looks a lot better. I'm going to blow it out now with compressed air. If you don't have compressed air, you can just clean it really well. Maybe use a Q-tip to get down into the needle seat. The needle seat here, make sure it's cleaned out well, and clean the needle tip off, and that should probably get you going. But I have compressed air here, so all the excess carburetor cleaner. Blow out my fuel inlet just to be sure that doesn't have any trash. Be careful with your accelerator pump feed hole. You don't want to blast it directly with compressed air. You could burst that diaphragm in there. It's pretty delicate. It's an S&S Super E. Be careful with this little rubber O-ring that goes right here. You don't want to have that on when you start blasting it with air. You blow it off and never find it. So I took that off previously. I'm going to put that right back on. I'm going to make sure my needle itself is clean. I'll give it a little dip and wipe. Carburetor cleaner. You should wear gloves when you work with this carburetor cleaner. I'm not wearing gloves, but I'm not here to tell you what to do. This stuff is known to cause cancer in the state of California, as well as the tap water and the sunshine. So if anything gets me, eventually it probably won't be carburetor cleaner. There we go, I've got that looking pretty good. That looks nice. Now I can put it all back together. I keep a lot of spare old cardboard around. It's good for things like this, so you can have a nice clean work surface. I just cut a piece off and throw it on the bench. I'm just giving this a little inspection by eye to make sure it looks good to me before I put it back together. I'm going to blow off my float. Make sure there's no loose debris on that. It can mess me up. So this float needle, it was just hanging right on this little hooked part here. It just dangles on there, and it just sets right down into that seat. Before I put it in there though, I need my pin. I'm going to put this pin through here. Every carburetor is slightly different, the way that the pin works and the way that the float is held in there, but they're all basically the same as far as a float. It's going to have a float, a needle, and a seat. Sometimes the seat is not removable. And sometimes it's a little tricky to get it all to go back in, but I'll get it here. There we go. You want to make sure that that float needle is moving freely in the seat. No resistance on it. This feels pretty good. This S&S Super E has a little retaining screw here. It holds the pin in. A lot of the Japanese carburetors, the pin will press out of part of the float bowl. So that's in there. Now to give it a little test, you can blow through the fuel inlet and make sure that when this float needle goes up, that's how it works. When the gas level fills up in this bowl, it'll raise the float and push down the needle, and it's just a valve. That needle will stop the flow of gas from coming in the carburetor. Obviously, when it was leaking before, something was preventing it from sealing. So I'm going to blow in a little bit. It seems to be working. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back together. Quick and easy, so don't panic if you turn the fuel on your carbureted motorcycle and fuel starts dumping everywhere. Definitely don't run it like that. It will catch on fire. So as tempting as it may be to tap on the carburetor a little bit and get it to stop and crank it back up, you're asking for trouble. I've had a couple of buddies that have had their bikes burned down, and I've done it once when I was a teenager with the little dirt bike that I had, where I just took it for granted and I kept running it like that. Oh, a little fuel leak. It doesn't do it all the time. And that was the end of my bike. So don't over tighten these screws. The fuel level doesn't go up that high. It's not pressurized, and you don't want to strip this stuff out. It's nothing worse than not being able to get the screw out when you need to quickly service your carburetor. And that's it. It's ready for installation. It's back on just that quick. Before I put the air cleaner back on, I'm going to check it and make sure it doesn't leak again. I don't have to do a bunch of extra work, so it would help if I hooked up my fuel line. When I finally start this bike up, I'm going to make sure that I clean all the gasoline off of it that's spilt on it and around it before I start it too, because I don't want to catch on fire. Okay, fuel line's hooked up. Now let's see if it leaks. And fuel is on. Let's give it a minute. Put the gasoline to fill the bowl. You can see I'm still leaking. Still leaking quite a bit. So that didn't work. It could be that my float needle is hardened, but I'm going to have to look at it again. I might just order a kit and then revisit that I don't think that I have an extra needle around here, but maybe that rubber is a little hard and causing it to do that. You know, but it bees that way sometimes. So I'll make another video once I get a new carb kit here, and I'll go over installing that and we'll see if it leaks then. Thanks for watching, guys.